Let's just talk about the difference between introverts and extroverts, okay? And what it really means, okay?
This topical study is actually part of a 30-day series I'm doing. And just real briefly, I use this thing called the Hemming Quaternity to analyze different things in life, what I'm doing, and also different topics like this. Now, this is maybe the simplest form of it. You can look at the end of this video if you want to know more about what this whole thing means. But as far as this, today we're just going to concentrate on contrasting these two here, abstraction and empathy.
Let's just talk about the difference between introverts and extroverts, okay? And what it really means, okay? And here's the thing, what it means, okay? It's not shyness. It's not whether you're shy or not. You could have an introvert who's shy or who's not shy, you know, but although, yeah, most of the time it does work out that way, but I'm just saying that's not really the definition. And it's not about recharging, what you do to recharge your energy. And again, that's probably true most of the time, that an introvert recharges more by being alone, but anyway, that's not really the actual definition though, according to a Jungian point of view. And it's not even about human beings. How about that? Do you ever know that I have an introverted, I'm having a really introverted moment here about that wall right now. It's an inanimate object, but I have an introverted, or I could have an extroverted view, feeling an extroverted type attitude about nature and the trees and everything else. And
just to clarify, it has to do with people too, but I'm just saying it's not just about people. It's about the world in general, this theory including people.
So it's really just a way of looking at the world in general, abstraction versus empathy, or introversion versus extroversion. So what do we want to say about it? Well, the introvert, he sees the world as alive, scary, and it needs some killing. Not to make, I'm just saying that's that'd be like a good clickbait title, but it'd probably get banned too. We're saying psychologically that the introvert, according to Jung, he kind of like naturally has a projection. Now, what it is we have both our unconscious and our conscious mind, and sometimes, like, let's just say we have like an unconscious map of reality that's in our mind somewhere, and we kind of, when we project, we kind of paint certain things on it. So basically, there's a big part of like how we see the world that isn't exactly objective, and it's based on just the subjective part of us. And so what we're saying is that the introvert, he kind of comes out and he's like, he's kind of scared, a little bit withdrawn, like, okay, I need to do something to control, like kind of like a little bit like an extreme thing, might be think everyone's kind of out to get him, the world's out to get him, the world just feels like it's, alive to start with, but maybe a little bit too alive.
The man with the abstracting attitude finds himself in a terribly animated world, which seeks to overpower and smother him. He therefore retires himself, so that in himself he may contrive that redeeming formula which can be relied upon to enhance his subjective value to a point where at least it shall be a match for the influence of the object.
But now they say that the extrovert, he sees the world as really dead and needing his life, so he kind of like already sees the life as just being like dead or just kind of neutral, that he can fill with his being, but so he's not really so much afraid of the world. It maybe, unless there's something actually, real to be afraid of, but I'm just saying, obviously, because most of the time as introverts, we get like fearful about stuff that doesn't really matter anyway, whether someone's going to talk to us or whatever, something that it doesn't have anything to do with any actual like pain or anything, but
the man with the feeling into attitude finds himself, on the contrary, in a world that needs his subjective feeling to give it life and soul. Confidingly, he bestows his animation upon it, while the abstracting individual retreats mistrustingly before the demons of objects and builds up a protective counterworld with abstract creations.
Anyway, and so, all right, so we have the extrovert. What he does is he tends to advance toward life, where the introvert, he tends to retreat. He's a kind of retreat, kind of think about it, as soon as he sees something, that maybe his first impulse is not just to say, hey, how's it going? It's to kind of, think about it a little bit. But so that's what that appearance of shyness would be, or maybe it is why he's shy. Now, the extrovert is more into empathy, and the introvert's more into abstraction. Now, maybe we don't even mean in a moral sense, but the empathy that Jung was talking about when he was calling it like Einflugen, or actually I suppose it was really Warringer who came up with the first, applied that word, but anyway, Einflugen, it means like flowing. There's not really an English equivalence to that, but it means like feeling into, like felt into, or empathetic art. There's a couple different ways you could say it, like, how you want to emphasize it.
Feeling into is the objectification of my quality into an object distinct from myself, whether the quality objectified merits the term feeling or not. While I am in the act of apperceiving an object, I experience as though in it or issuing from it, as something apperceived and present in it, an impetus towards a definite manner of inner behavior. This appears as given through it, as though imparted to me by it.
Like in English, because we don't have the perfect English word for that. So anyway, and then, okay, and so the reason like this introversion and extroversion happens to be explained best in a chapter of art, and I guess that aesthetics is sort of like how we see the world in general. That's like a really good, so we might see a lot of beauty out here. Oh, this is beautiful, different things, but when you put it down in art, it's like you're really just like concentrating like all those different forms, what we find beauty on the world, what we find pleasing about the world, how we assimilate the world, and then also like that probably a guy to make like what we call extroverted art, he would need to be in that state, to make that, and conversely, or be in an abstract state. Now I don't even know if I'm going to say it like all artists, mostly Western art, because by the way, it has to do with Western art, like we said, but I don't know if we're saying that most of these guys are actually extroverts or just say they can handle that attitude in art, I don't know, but basically though, the idea is that empathy, so empathy, that means feeling into it, usually has to do with like in art, like curves and different things like that, where you flow into something, you become part of it, you move with that stuff. Now one thing is there's kind of a limit to how much you could do that. They want an extrovert wants to kind of do that for all life. There's a limit to how much you could do that. So if something really is kind of objectively doesn't match that, then they're not going to be able to really feel themselves into it so well, so there's a limit. And obviously we know there's like good art, bad art, and then, so that's what empathy. Now abstraction, well, okay, let's just give a quick definition of abstraction, but it basically means you draw out a certain characteristic, like it might be like something like the temperature. Well, basically you make it into some kind of map or something. That's usually an example of abstraction. You kind of take one variable like the temperature, the altitude, something like that, and you make it into like a, so you take like one aspect and you kind of make like a simplified thing of reality. And also what you do is you try to take the individuality out of like a group of objects, or like maybe if you think about a whole like a page, like the world is being like a group of objects. So basically that's why it would favor some kind of like geometric shape that like could fill in the spaces and makes it easy for you to like predict where things are, which is what I would call like the crystalline beauty. Okay, there's something beauty in the crystalline of just like the perfect geometry of that and stuff like that, and we'll get a little more into that in a second.
Abstraction, as the word already implies, is the drawing out or isolation of a content, for example, a meaning or general character, etc., from a connection containing other elements whose combination as a totality is something unique or individual, and therefore inaccessible to comparison. Singularity, uniqueness, and incomparability are obstacles to cognition. Hence, to the cognitive tendency, the remaining elements, though felt to be essentially bound up with the content, must appear irrelevant. Abstraction, therefore, is that form of mental activity which releases the essential content or fact from its connection with irrelevant elements. It distinguishes it from them, or in other words, differentiates it. See differentiation. In its wider sense, everything is abstract that is separated from its connection with non-appertaining elements.
So, so it makes the world like more simple, like less fearful, and like a little more like going to according to like more like law-abiding forms or whatever we'd say. And it's also has to be making stuff like eternal. They say like and a lot of times like Egyptian art or something like that, they might make someone's face look like kind of like a pyramid or a triangle or something like that. Well, that's because they're trying to make things into like more like taking the arbitrariness out of life, and making it to where things are fitting according to a law-abiding formula, an eternal form, like a triangle and stuff like that. Because if you want to get into some philosophy stuff like Plato thing, that okay, there's this in the eternal realms or something. There's like this perfect example of this triangle that we bring into like the real world. That's like the pure form of it. And anyway, and so then okay, so Western art's gonna have lots of flowing, and it usually looks more like life. And you've seen like the abstract art; it's just more going to be like angular. I guess maybe this is an okay example from this cover. I don't even know who this is, but of this particular thing. But you've seen like the abstract, it tends to simplify. It's more like it doesn't look so alive, but it has a certain beauty if it's done right, based on a crystalline beauty, based on simplicity, symmetry, those sort of things, and even stuff like that. A simple basic idea, like if you see someone say, "Oh, that's a beautiful equation. That's a beautiful." I love when a beautiful plan comes together. Just like something that's beautifully connected, and just has, in its structure and symmetry, that sort of thing, more than like that because it looks like, oh, it's, you can imagine yourself flowing through this stream. Oh, by the way, I should say too that the idea of mirror neurons, I guess more than 100 years after Jung's thing, kind of seems like it goes along with this empathetic thing that, you feel a certain thing, you feel yourself into something. Like, okay, the other day I was watching, like, I know it was the first time I ever watched like that Purple Rain, but it was after all these years I was a little bit interested, especially since I've been in Minnesota for a long time. But there was like that one part where it's just like, purify yourself in Lake Minnetonka or something like that, and then she like jumps in, like in my body I felt like kind of like this kind of chill for a second, kind of like I was jumping, and that shows that, yeah, those are mirror neurons, that it allows you to feel those kind of things. Like that means a mirror neuron means that when you see someone throw a baseball, there's a certain part of your muscles that are like being stimulated in the same way as that guy throwing a baseball.
So when you see someone do something, certain percentage of your neurons in your body are stimulated as if you were doing it yourself. And in this case, it can even happen if you see someone doing something on TV in a fictional thing, or just even imagine somebody doing something that it can still stimulate those mirror neurons.
And then, so by doing that, you can feel yourself into the world, by imagining, seeing that, oh, there's like this internal shape that's in my body that inside that I can project out on the world. And it also kind of shows that, about the idea of like beauty being more like something that's inside you, that more like it's like projected in the world, because you find stuff that matches like these timeless, like beautiful forms, so anyway, kind of a deep thing there. And anyway, and that would be the idea of the mirror neurons. Now one thing is, all of us are a mixture of it, and not one is better than the other.
Insofar as the felt into content represents an essential part of the subject. He becomes the object. He identifies himself with it, and in this way gets rid of himself. But since we feel this will to activity into another object, we are in the other object. We are released from our own individual being, just insofar as our urge for experience engrosses us in an outer object or an extrinsic form. This image has the magical importance of a defense against the chaotic change of experience. He becomes so lost and submerged in this image that finally its abstract truth is set above the reality of life, and therewith life, which might disturb the enjoyment of abstract beauty, is wholly suppressed. He raises himself to an abstraction. He identifies himself with the eternal validity of his image, and therein congeals, since it practically amounts to a redeeming formula. In this way, he divests himself of his real self and transfers his life into his abstraction, in which it is, so to speak, crystallized.
Like, I would definitely like to be like the people who can really enjoy nature better. I'd really definitely like to be like those people too. Maybe sometimes I might get kind of bored being at a beach or something, because but and so definitely I'd like to. It's something for us both to work on. We both need both things. I mean, but most of us, whether we're introverts or not, we can go to like an art museum and say, oh, that's really like a beautiful, like, I don't know, Rembrandt or something like that. Something real, like these natural colors, like, I don't, all that natural flowing and stuff, flowing into colors, that sort of thing. So we can all enjoy that sort of thing too. That's, but this abstract is another time. Okay, another time I should think is when people love stuff like maps. That's also like the love for like the abstraction. And because it's tied to maybe something like the world, you actually are in a sense like abstracting the world. It's making you feel more happy about actually going out in the world by having the abstract image of it. So that's one thing about it helping with travel, van life, is like abstraction, maps. But the other type too as well, when you flow out into the world. Okay, so let's just do a little like thing here. And so this is like the type thing that I one day maybe like to come up with a really good, like, make sure this air fissure down. This is kind of blowing this. That one day I'd like to come up with like a better picture of this, and but okay, something that would really work. Okay, let's just say this is going to be introvert or extrovert, how they see the world and beauty. Okay, so this right side, okay, it starts out, okay, I just drew like a weird shaped object on the right there, and then I'm showing the green is like the unconscious pretty much, and the top is pretty much the conscious. And it's kind of hard to really split these up exactly, but because I think maybe there's some elements of both in both your unconscious and your conscious. But I just drew that. But that's why I drew like this top part. There's kind of like this shape is moved, the same shape, ideal shape as in both the conscious and the unconscious, but kind of like in a lesser form up there. It hasn't been that activated. Then they're just looking at some random. There's this random object out here. And then it decides to look at it. Okay, now it's the arrow represents. So you see how this is supposed to be like a person. I have the triangle. Well, basically, the reason a triangle is supposed to be like, okay, like the iceberg, like, oh, your unconscious is like, below the iceberg. Although I guess here I drew it more where it's about even. So anyway, but that's why I had it be a triangle like this. Anyway, so now he's looking at this object. He's starting to get going here. And then all of a sudden he projects like these lines here, like this onto it mentally. He projects onto this mental map, this map inside his unconscious, this circle shape on the thing, on the object, okay, because he's projecting as he's looking at it, first. That's what happens. And then what happens is, you see it kind of activates the one in his conscious mind, that circle shape. Then all of a sudden, it's almost like, just to exaggerate, now it's like the thing seems like it's alive. So basically, I don't know if I mentioned that, sometimes they call it aesthetic animation too. That's another, that's another idea, that's another name for the, what's going on, that felt into. Some people say that's preferred to it, but anyway, so basically, but the idea is that the guy doesn't think like, oh, hey, like I'm feeling myself into this object. Now, maybe you might, like once you actually consciously do, learn this theory, maybe I even might think that, but in general, if a guy doesn't know, he just thinks, oh yeah, the stuff's alive. And then, but they kind of like to go with it in life. How you might notice an extrovert say, yeah, well, you ever notice when your wife is doing this? And it's almost like he's assuming everybody he's talking to is married, or, they a lot of times, like because they want to flow into life like that. And a lot of times, obviously, they are very nice people, and they can really, they'll want to help you a lot because they can actually feel for you and stuff. I mean, I guess it can go negative. Obviously, we seen that, like, well, anyway, we'll get into that. But obviously, a person could be like real, like personal, and do some bad stuff. We know that too. But anyway, but as far as that, they're good as far as personal. They like to kind of change the world too, and kind of get into, kind of like and replicate themselves across the world, and because that, like, oh, you do this well. When you do this, this. It seems like, that's what they say, that like an extrovert is more likely to come up with one of these like universal principles like that, where an introvert's like, well, what do you mean? Not me. I don't even, something like, oh, this sports analogy, I don't even like sports, or something like that. It's like, something like that. So anyway, and then if you want to just draw it as just like maybe a more simplified version of what happens is, I was just think of it like a harpoon. So he's got the circle, he opens his eyes, he throws a circle on it. Now he's smiling, he's kind of moving toward it. Now of course there's a limit, okay? Like you said, in Jung, they even said there's a limit to like how, something can't be like just, totally ugly. And, there has to be a certain amount of beauty for you to be able to project yourself into it. But I guess I could try pretty hard, right? And now your introvert, what he does, okay, so I'm showing that his coming out of his unconscious is basically this world looks real chaotic. Okay, that kind of represents the world or the object. And by the way, I don't know if I said earlier, but okay, whenever it says like subjective, the subject is you and the object is external world, whatever it is. Okay, so they talk a lot about that. And so you just say, well, they're okay. That's why I say it's objective. You're just based on the objective. But you'll even see sometimes they'll say that even like basing your decisions always on objective data is not always like going to be the best, because it kind of that assumes that there's not going to be any general principles that you can, let's just say, some equation that figures out like, no, that this is like an abnormality. Anyway, so this guy, all right, so he starts looking at this thing, and then all of a sudden, then he like projects like these lines of force. It's kind of hard to see if they say if they should be coming from the conscious. I guess it's mostly conscious. Okay, he kind of like projects this, and then what he does is he kind of, so in his mind he's projected kind of like this more simplified like geometric image that's making the thing look more chaotic, less chaotic, right? And then down here what he does is he sees the objects. He's got this in his mind, okay, and it's supposed to be a tree, by the way, and then he kind of builds like this mental image of it, okay? He creates this abstract image of it, of this tree. Anyway, maybe I shouldn't have made it a tree, but okay, we'll just make it. And then you can see what it is at some point he's looking at that, but he's mostly looking back at the abstract image. So that's the only problem, is sometimes, a lot of times, introverts, they're not really going to be interacting with like the actual person in front of them, but the abstract image of them, and who they, something like that. They got to learn to not do that. But that's I think the way I was trying to think is, I think like if you're, and like I said, it's not going to happen all the time. Thank God you can do, there's other times we can, learn to like, be other ways, but it would be like hell to be either one, let's see, there was a play he mentions in the one about there was a Prometheus and Epimetheus, where Prometheus is like the extreme like introvert, and then like Epimetheus is the extreme extrovert, and then and because of that, they both like end up like equally effed, because they both, because it's like neither one. That's the idea, to show that it's a mixture. I mean, I guess I'd prefer just to be like the introvert, because I've been one my whole life and I'm kind of used to being this way, but definitely I'd like to be like more outgoing if I could. If there's some drug I could take or something. No, anyway. So so what was I just talking about? So either one's not good, either extreme. But anyway, I think when you're an introvert, you tend to like, most of the time, like, let's see, as soon as you hear some word for the first time, you see something, all of a sudden it's almost like your eyes roll back into your head, and you're almost like you're comparing it to all the different like mental image that you always have of the thing. And where the extrovert, you're more like looking for, hey, hello, how are you? And then and it's also too, we know that like extroverts are gonna like enjoy like more like small talk, where introvert has a hard time if no one's talking about something real deep or anything. So, but anyway, so that's the basic definition. It's just it's how you are at a beach, because I mean, you might get some guys like an introvert like me might even get bored at a beach, and I got to have some kind of like look at some equation, where some guy might just be able to sit there and just think about the texture of the sand and all. I mean, I guess there's other things too. Now we're getting into whether a person's real sensory or not, so that's also kind of goes together. But as far as like the empathy versus the abstraction, that's the key thing that makes a difference between a introvert and a extrovert. And withdrawing libido, I don't know if I said libido earlier, I said withdraw, but I'm not sure if I use that expression. That's another expression he uses like in Jung is so anyway, I guess this is my video for the day, and I'm gonna then later on edit this and probably like clip in like a few like passages and stuff. All right, so that worked out pretty well.
This 30-day YouTube mini-series is a psychological experiment using Jungian psychology to live better and experience more this summer. I'm not a psychologist, just a layman looking to apply Jungian principles to life. I'm starting with the idea that the unconscious mind is very smart and tells us things. And believing in this, I drove up to Hibbing, Minnesota, and I found that 4 locations in Hibbing, Minnesota corresponded quite well to 4 different principles called the Hibbing Quaternity. The first one is the Hibbing Ghost Town, which the characteristics is you feel the echo of the past as the wind flows down established paths. This represents unconscious voice being in the center of a moving circle, the mother archetype, home, center, castle, etc. Character I'm coming up with here to explain it is Nellie, the ghost sheepdog mom who circles the area, protects and guides. The Greyhound Museum has to do with travel and also the Jungian idea of beauty as a way of mentally feeling your way into physical objects and flowing into life in general, flowing beauty, mentally becoming part of the object. The character here I'm coming up with is Flows With It, which is a Native American cartoon character who has a magic canoe, finds all paths, glides over, portages, flows into life. Now the ore pit, it represents the smallness of the individual, abstraction, and the way in making the world simpler, more understandable. Actions, the beauty of symmetry, the beauty of maps, beauty of mathematics. And this is supposed to be Laser Nash. Doesn't look like him that much, but anyway, it's like John Nash with his cup sending out all these laser beams across, dividing the world, trying to find that order in the chaos from A Beautiful Mind, if you haven't seen that movie. Bob Dylan's home, it represents stories, archetypes, wishing to become someone else. DJ Hat Trick, what he does is he gets people into the groove by putting different hats on and sending people into different paths. Sort of like the way we do whenever we listen to a song, for example. Here's a simplified view of the quaternity here that I'm going to be using for this 30-day adventure. And this is what it's going to more look like. I'm just going to do a simple sketch that I'll put in the video and then just kind of explain it like on a notepad like this to make it simpler so I can get it done. So I can do a video for 30 days. And so subscribe to get all 30 of those videos.